As I said at the end of my last video, I'm going to start this video with another example of NIST working from a preconceived conclusion, to help people understand one of the most commonly held misconceptions regarding the World Trade Center building collapses debate. If you're aware of the World Trade Center building collapses at all, then you are probably aware of the phrase, "jet fuel can't melt steel beams." This phrase has become trite and, from my perspective, never served its intended purpose. This phrase was originally intended to provoke people into learning about what is maybe the most heavily documented and corroborated evidence that is in contradiction with what we have been told about how the towers collapsed.
As much as 6% of the World Trade Center dust consisted of tiny, previously molten iron spheres. What does this tell us about the temperatures generated in the tower's destruction?
When the USGS collected samples of the World Trade Center dust, they found the iron microspheres. Insofar, the USGS does not have a valid explanation for the presence of these iron microspheres.
Overflights had detected with infrared camera 1400 degree Fahrenheit hotspots on the surface of ground zero, and that being there for a week indicates that there was something very hot going on below the surface. I'd like to know why NIST excluded the evidence of melting steel. Why is this not included? Why is this forensic evidence not being included in the report?
First of all, let's go back to your basic premise that there was a pool of molten steel. I know of absolutely nobody, and no eyewitness who said so, nobody who's produced it.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails, like you're in a foundry.
Yeah, like lava.
Like it was
Like
lava
lava.
from a volcano.
Actually melted beams where it was molten steel that was being dug out.
Underground, it was still so hot that molten metal dripped down the sides of a wall.
It's this fused element of steel, molten steel and concrete and all of these things all fused by the heat into one single element.
And they pulled off a big block of concrete, and there was like a little river of steel flowing.
Many witnesses, firemen and lots of people described the flowing molten metal, iron or steel, at extremely hot temperatures, and John Gross categorically denied their observations, so that because their observations don't fit his preconceived notion, he not only ignored evidence, he denied evidence.
In an office fire, you cannot generate enough heat to melt steel. And yet we have evidence of molten iron in the microspheres, in the rubble pile, and the metal pouring out of the side of the tower.
Not only did NIST lie about the existence of copious amounts of eyewitness testimony from experts and others, and evidence documented in independent studies, they threw out Appendix C of the FEMA report, which documented intergranular melting of the only piece of World Trade Center 7 steel that was analyzed. The phrase "jet fuel can't melt steel beams" has failed miserably. When this phrase is responded to by those defending the official narrative, they completely miss the point. They present the argument that, well, the steel doesn't have to melt, it only has to weaken for the buildings to come down. As if we conjured up the idea that there was molten metal with no evidence of its existence. The point is that there was molten metal, in abundance, present before during, and after the World Trade Center building collapses. In a moment, I'm going to show you a couple of videos, one that went viral and one that didn't. These videos present a good opportunity for people to learn about just how far a simple misconception can go. I'll start with the video that didn't go viral. This is a video where the pop science guru Dr. Michio Kaku is politely encountered by some people wanting him to address the molten metal issue.
Dr. Kaku, I think one of the main things that drives the quote-unquote conspiracy theorists in regards to September 11th, which I asked you about earlier, and the collapse of World Trade 7 in particular, it wasn't hit by a plane, and yet it fell at free fall speed.
That's right.
And it wasn't a similar fashion to World Trade 1 and 2.
Right. Well, 1 and 2 can be more or less explained because you know the softening point of steel, not the melting point. You know, the softening point of steel. That's within the framework of fire. Unlike what Rosie O'Donnell said on The View Show, fires can melt steel. She said fires cannot melt steel. They soften steel, leading to the collapse of steel. That you can measure in your oven.
Well,
you can measure that in your own oven.
Yeah, I mean that's mildly debatable, I suppose. But I mean,
you can do this at home.
Well, I mean, molten metal though, for months later.
No, not molten metal. Softened metal.
Well, there's
now,
numerous.
We're not talking molten metal.
Well, there is
anyway,
molten level at the site.
We had a couple of...
Not only was Dr. Kaku unaware of the documented molten metal, but he continually cut off the person whenever he tried to inform him of it. Dr. Michio Kaku is a palpably brilliant thinker, but he refuses to be informed and apply his obvious skill to the topic objectively. You can see why, after 18 years, we are still fighting for the truth of what happened on that horrible day. The second video, which went viral with 11 million views on YouTube, is of a passionate iron worker who made the same mistake. This time, I'm going to let civil engineer Jonathan Cole, in his video for the Undying 9/11 Moronic Replies, explain the issues with this iron worker's thinking beyond the simple fact he is unaware of the molten metal reality.
So the question is, what heat melted that steel? Office fires and jet fuel can't melt steel beams. But rather than addressing the evidence, most ignore or dismiss it.
Jet fuel melting steel beams, they don't have to melt them, guys. They don't have to melt anything. They don't have to liquefy steel, but you can bend steel with your bare hands if it gets over like 1800 degrees. That's not very hot in the realm of fire, especially when fueled by kerosene from jet fuel. I mean, it can compromise the integrity of any structure. Trust me.
He's wrong. The steel did melt. So the question remains, where did the heat come from? And any steel compromise would be up where the fires were, sagging down, but not suddenly exploding outward in a shower of dust. Others have posted experiments proving the obvious, that if you heat steel red hot, it gets very weak.
So I am taking time out of my busy day to try to put to rest one of the more moronic things I have seen on the internet lately, and that's saying something. Through my Facebook feed, I saw yet again that old tired argument, that question. Jet fuel only burns at 1500 degrees, and since steel melts at 2700 degrees, 9/11 was a conspiracy. I am so sick and tired of this argument. I put this in the oven. Now watch this. I'm going to take my pinky finger, half-inch solid steel. Check it out. It's a freaking noodle. Your argument is invalid. Get over it. Find a job.
Most people, and certainly thousands of architects and engineers, already knew this. So what can we learn from his experiment if we apply it to the towers on 9/11? Well, if all the steel in the tower lobby was red hot, and there was a horizontal force like a strong wind, the towers should have tipped over. But where was the heat? It was way up on the upper floors. The lower floors remained stone cold and very strong as the people evacuated. And how did the towers fall? The upper floors accelerated down into the larger, cold, and stronger structure below. And the only force we are told, that caused this remarkable motion was downward from gravity alone. But what happened when the blacksmith applied a downward force?
It's very hot, but not melted. Obviously, it is not melted.
The steel rod didn't accelerate down like the top of the towers. And he's right. Obviously, it's not melted. But that's what the saying, jet fuel can't melt steel beams, is all about. Those fires couldn't have melted that steel. I'm not a blacksmith, but I can heat steel just as hot. Let's conduct a more realistic experiment by heating a rod about where the heat really was in the towers, and see if the top accelerates down by gravity alone. Obviously, the top doesn't accelerate down by gravity alone, even if I hammer it down. People don't understand the jet fuel meme and think suddenly they alone have solved the problem of the tower's fall.
But if you hold this up as a reason for conspiracy, you are an idiot.
I might be, but these guys who were there are not. Research and understand the issues, and then try to find any realistic experiment using steel and concrete that demonstrates the destruction of those towers by fire and gravity alone. But you won't, because it's impossible, which is why nobody, no university, no engineers, NIST, FEMA, no one, has been able to provide any real experiment that demonstrates the motions observed, and why none of the official investigations were ever able to address these simple, unanswered questions. And while he may not care,
if it was conspiracy, I do not care.
Some of us do care about all those that were murdered when the towers were intentionally blown up.
In the hope that this message will somehow reach Joe Rogan, at times I'm going to speak as if I'm addressing him directly. Joe, I'm a big fan of yours, and in general, I like how open-minded you are and willing to discuss ideas and complicated issues with a broad range of people and personalities. It is to this side of yourself that I am appealing to. Here's a clip of Joe speaking just before he broached the topic of the World Trade Center 7 collapse, followed by a clip of him making an untrue claim about quote-unquote conspiracy theorists, followed by him proclaiming his new enlightened understanding of how World Trade Center 7 collapsed.
I'm interested in finding out what things really are, like legitimately what they really are.
Yeah.
And even if I'm wrong, like I'm not interested in reinforcing things I've already said. If I find out that what I said was wrong, I'm interested in repeating that I was wrong as many times as I can to get it out to as many people as I can.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Because I think it's important.
After making this claim about himself, Joe proceeds to passionately explain how he and others have come to realize how quote-unquote conspiracy theorists are wrong about World Trade Center 7 being a controlled demolition. He makes an untrue claim that, quote, everyone is just showing the very final video, and then essentially says that the entire video of the collapse shows the interior collapsing first, as if he's made this rare leap that conspiracy theorists haven't done, which consists of watching the entire collapse. For those of you who are well aware of the extensive documented work on every aspect of the World Trade Center 7 collapse by AE 9/11 Truth and others, I know it's hard to listen to someone who is completely unaware of its existence and is so far behind in his thinking. But you have to understand that many people come to believe these untrue claims and choose not to look any further into the collapse of World Trade Center 7. For those of you who aren't so informed about the World Trade Center 7 collapse, please see my previous Joe Rogan Mick West response video. Go to ae911truth.org or WTC7evaluation.org.
There's a guy who was a conspiracy guy. He was really deep into conspiracies. And then the more he started looking into Tower 7, the more he realized that everyone is just showing the very final video where Tower 7 collapses like a controlled demolition. And it looks exactly like a controlled demolition. However, if you find the full video, you see that the interior had collapsed moments before, like quite a bit before.
Edward Current, I think, is the guy who did that
I think
video.
that's exactly who it is. See if you can find that gentleman's video. But he shows how the top of it, you could see the top of Tower 7 give in, which is consistent with this idea that the diesel fuel that they had in the basement had created, wasn't it like diesel tanks?
Yeah, that was an early theory of the diesel fuel, that was actually fueling the fire, but they never found any evidence that actually the diesel fuel contributed to the fires. It was just regular office fires, which is what everybody finds so suspicious.
So the diesel never caught fire? Is
They
that what
don't
they're
know.
saying?
They don't. It
know.
might have been after the collapse. I think they recovered one of the tanks with some diesel still in it.
So, series of diesel, likely fed by a series of diesel generators located in the lower floors, which is where most of the fires were concentrated. So at least one of the diesel tanks didn't light up. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. The theory, like NIST theory, is that the diesel had nothing to do with it.
Okay. So NIST, which if you are a conspiracy theory person, they get really angry when you bring up NIST.
Because they're the government.
The government, man.
In this clip, you can see that Joe has claimed World Trade Center 7 fell as a result of diesel fuel fires. To Mick's credit, he chose to correct Joe on this mistake and not so adamantly explain that NIST had discounted that early theory. Without missing a beat and without, quote, repeating that he was wrong, Joe moves on from his discounted theory, continues on his tirade against, quote, conspiracy theorists, and continues to be as adamant about the official narrative being true as he was before his beliefs were corrected just a moment before. This incident may seem innocuous at first glance, but the issue of people choosing whatever theory they want as long as it fits the overall narrative of what we've been told about the 9/11 attacks has metastasized to the point where it doesn't matter who you are, from what platform you proclaim your beliefs, and what your duty is under your professional code of ethics. To demonstrate how professionals are not held to account when it comes to the 9/11 attacks, here is a video from the American Institute of Architects National Convention in 2015 in Atlanta, Georgia. The video was taken from the resolution segment of the convention. This is where members of the AIA vote on ideas discussed by those who are for the resolution and those who are opposed to the resolution. If the resolution is adopted, it can lead to action by the organization. AE 9/11 Truth, who have many members in the American Institute of Architects, including a fellow Dan Barnum, posed a resolution calling for the AIA to simply take the official standpoint of calling for a new investigation into the collapses of World Trade Center Buildings 1, 2, and 7. The speakers who spoke out against the resolution used ad hominem attacks, emotional pleas, and in the following clip, a familiar discounted theory.
On 9/11, 2001, my office was on the 21st floor of 2 World Trade Center. I lived through that experience, and at an emotional level, I please ask you to let us move on from that day. It is time for us to move forward. That building collapsed. The building collapsed because of a raging fire caused by 6,000 plus gallons of diesel fuel that fed the New York City Emergency Response Center. That's not true. You need to admit that to yourselves.
There's no evidence.
And I'm urging the Institute to go no other resolution, and I respectfully request to hold the question.
The collapse was also not due to the fuel oil fires, diesel fuel oil, substantial amounts of diesel fuel that were in the building. Such fires from ruptured fuel lines or from fuel stored in day tanks on the lower floors could not have been sustained long enough, would have not generated sufficient heat to weaken critical columns, and would have produced copious smoke that was not observed on 9/11.
Those of you who have watched both of my Joe Rogan Mick West interview response videos can see that Joe and Mick's discussion is almost completely removed from reality. I'm not going to waste my or anyone else's time and energy on the rest of their 9/11 discussion, as it was focused on strawman arguments of a tiny minority of epistemologically challenged people who don't represent the millions truly fighting for the truth of what happened on that horrible day and in the subsequent events. Joe, as I have demonstrated in my previous video regarding your Mick West interview, NIST has not been transparent. Professor Leroy Halsey has and will continue to be. Take advantage of this opportunity to invite the 50-year structural and forensic engineer onto your show to discuss the findings of his peer-reviewed study. Invite Mick back to debate him on air. I would suggest also inviting Shyam Sundar and John Gross, but their track record speaks for itself.